Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I call to order the meeting of the Manassas Park Governing Body for Tuesday, September 10th, 2024. First, we have approval of the agenda, and it is an amended agenda. We will make a small adjustment. 10A becomes 10B, and 10B becomes 10A. I also think we have a closed session. City Attorney, if we do, could you read the citation, please?
Yes, it'll be paragraphs 3, 5, and 29 of subsection 2.2-3711A of Code of Virginia.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the amended agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Please join us in a moment of silence, and Councilmember Amaya, would you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next we have public comment time. There's no one signed up, but is there anyone who would like to make public comment but has not signed up? Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead.
Okay, just a reminder that we have another street cleanup this Saturday from 10 to noon. We're going to meet at Parks and Rec, and pretty much it's going to be up and down Denver Drive.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have an email public comment that was sent in from Ms. Emily Hollingsworth, who lives in the Blooms Crossing subdivision. I will paraphrase since it's a longer email. Ms. Hollingsworth is concerned about the recent death of a 31-year-old man in Blooms Park, and this reinforced her longstanding concerns with the park. The terrain and the hiking paths are difficult and very rigorous, and cell phone reception is not good. If someone needed to call for help, Ms. Hollingworth suggests more safety measures such as cutting brush, better maintenance of pavement, and the installation of blue light emergency stations to provide the resources and the support for park attendees. Thank you, Ms. Hollingsworth. I believe, City Manager, I believe that there is a emergency call box for Blooms Park in the CIP. Is that correct?
Good evening, members of the governing body. Mayor, that's correct. Initially, the call box was in the fiscal year 25 CIP. However, due to the budget constraint, we had to push it back in the out years. Right now, it's in fiscal year 30. I know that's a long time away. We're going to scrap the final ARPA budget. If we have excess there that we need to spend by the end of the calendar year, this is something that we could look at since it could be eligible. But I can't make any promises until I scrap the ARPA budget.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Also, at this time, I would like to express the city's condolences on the loss of Mamta Kafle-Bat. We know there's a great deal of pain and sorrow in the community right now. Our thoughts and our hearts go out to not only the Nepalese community, but also to everyone who knew and worked with Mamta. This evening, we will have a presentation about domestic violence resources that are available. This is available, that will be, I believe it already is available on the city's website. And I would say to everyone listening this evening that if anyone comes to you and needs this type of help, please help them get the resources that they need. Always take them seriously. Okay, thank you, folks. Okay, moving on to number 6. Number 6 is a proclamation declaring September as Recovery Month. Whereas mental health and substance use disorders affect every community nationwide, as well as here in Prince William County. Whereas SAMHSA reports that 1 in 4 Americans identify as having mental health or substance use disorder, with 22.3 million Americans having reached recovery from a substance use disorder. And whereas with commitment and support, those impacted by mental health or substance use disorders can embark on a journey of resilience, improved health, and overall wellness. And whereas Recovery Month is observed each September to celebrate all people that make the journey of recovery possible by embracing the art of recovery, to spread the message that people can and do recover every day. And whereas the goal of Recovery Month is to improve the lives of those affected by mental health and substance use disorders by raising awareness and educating communities about the effective services that are available, and whereas residents are encouraged to be aware of and able to recognize the signs of mental health and substance use disorders and assist family, friends, and coworkers when possible, and people in need of recovery services are encouraged to seek help. Whereas Community Services believes change is possible, the agency and its community partners are hosting a Recovery Rocks event on September 13th at the A.J. Ferlazzo Building and invite community allies and people in recovery to share their stories of resilience and services. And we invite you to say a few words after you receive the proclamation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All
Thank
right.
you.
My name is Jim Wooler.
We're gonna take a picture.
Oh, photo, okay. My first proclamation. What do I get, like an hour and a half to tell you my whole story?
About.
With the mayor, absolutely.
There's the city seal.
I gotta be careful, I'm a hugger, so I don't want to hug you. I'll do that. Okay. And I would just say, on behalf of the Community Service Board, just thank you for recognizing the importance and the possibility of recovery. We're thankful for Manassas Park, Manassas City, and all of Prince William County for the work that we do to, we're glad you're behind us on that. So thank you.
Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming this evening. Thank you. Okay, moving on to presentations. We have 3 presentations this evening. The first one is the opioid grant funding projects.
Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the governing body, I'm going to try to keep this brief. I just want to give you a summary of what's going on. Please, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, either now or later. So right now, the city has received, actually this number is not quite accurate. I did this slide last week. At the time it was $67,995,000.90. Since that time, we've received a little over $3,000 more. We haven't actually gotten in the checking account yet, but we've been notified that it's coming from another settlement. So these happen all the time, and Dean usually sends me an email saying there's this much money coming, and we add it to the list. So direct distributions of funds that we have received but do not have to apply for. They are in the bank as we speak. But we do want to meet the gold standard. The Opioid Abatement Authority, the OAA, has set up this. I'll let him do his thing. I just heard a beep. Sorry about that. So the OAA has set up what they call a gold standard. And the reason for the gold standard is that all the distributions, all the settlements are slightly different. They have different legal requirements. But the gold standard meets all of them. So instead of having to go for each distribution we get and figure out what we have to report or not report, or what we can use it for, not use it for, if we meet the gold standard, we're basically golden. We know we've met it before. So the OAA strongly recommends that cities and counties voluntarily adopt and apply the OAA requirements toward these direct distributions. If we do, And if we apply for an individual distribution, which is something we have to apply for, but we have not done so yet, we can, we would actually receive a 25% bonus from the OAA for that individual distribution. But as I said, that money we have, this almost $70,000, is from our direct distribution, not from the individual distributions, but the recommendation still is meet the gold standard for everything. It just makes it a lot easier. It makes, that way nobody can come at us and say, well, you didn't meet this particular requirement for these $3,000 we got. It meets it all. We have received a couple potential projects. We've discussed these projects. I have actually talked with the OAA a couple times. I have pretty good connections with them to see if these projects meet the gold standards, and they feel that they would. So I think we're good with that. So the first project that we're approached by is for the schools. The schools have a parent-student education night. And what they do is they have a guest speaker named Katrina King, an FBI speaker, and they want basically education about opioid use. And what they do is they want to offer food and beverages to parents, do a drawing for a gift basket and all that, and the total cost is about $2,000, a little more per event. And the idea is to do this twice a year. This fits within the gold standard. We could fund this. I actually talked to the schools earlier today to figure out exactly how the accounting would work for all this, but we're working on that. And probably their thought is to do one in late fall, early winter, and then again next semester. So do it twice a year. It's about $2,025 a year to do this. There are also some other programs which they're fleshing out. Again, I've run these by the OAA, and the OAA is okay with all of them. One is to work with STEM students, to work in a local opioid clinic, which will be the MAP clinic, most likely, to interact with professionals for education purposes and to give out information. Enhance the health and PE classes to educate students about the impact of opioids. And also for the CTE students, again, partnering the MAP clinic or Capital Cairns Pain Clinic, to work with the social workers to give out information and provide guidance to people who come to those clinics. So these have not been fleshed out as much as they will be, but these are, again, the concept has been run by the OAA, and the OAA is good with all these concepts. I have talked extensively with the MAP clinic. They want to do a peer recovery specialist to the existing MAT program. For those who don't know what MAT programs are, it's medication-assisted treatment. They do this. This would be basically a 6-month program, which they'd like to make it for a year, which would double the $25,000 to $50,000. But like I said, we have a little bit over $70,000 in the account right now, and more coming in. Don't know when and how much, but more coming in. And they would like to do this to help bridge the gap between the clinical treatment and a community-based support system. It would involve hiring some people at the MAP clinic and providing additional services of what they do now. One of the things we cannot do is supplant existing services. So if somebody does something already, we can't say, oh yeah, we'll pay for it, if it's already in their budget. If their budget is only for the, let's say, till the end of the year, and then they ask us to extend it, that we can do, but we can't supplant existing services. So this is not a supplanting. Lastly, there's something called the partnership projects. This is where regional, so in our case, it will be the City of Manassas Park, the City of Manassas, and Prince William County, where we do something together. There's a meeting next week that I'm attending. There's about, I believe it's 6 different ideas that are going to be discussed. We have $22,518 plus the 25% gold standard if we wanted to apply for that, that we could apply for, and then if we get it, we could use it towards these projects. I don't know yet what projects the county will, what ranking they're going to put it in. One of my suggestions, which is on the list of, I think it's 6 projects, is what are called harm reduction kiosks. Best way to describe it, and this is also something that Richmond City is already doing. I've talked to the people in Richmond City who are doing this, and they are doing this. It's being done nationwide. The best way to describe it is think of a Coke machine without the glass, a solid steel Coke machine that's in a public place. We'd have to figure out where to put it, but it's not behind closed doors. It's not in an office. It's something that somebody can get to 24/7 without being recognized, without being, having to sign in, anything like that. And in this case, the idea is to have things like Narcan in it, opioid test kits, fentanyl test kits, xylazine test kits, and possibly other things also. That's something that would have to be the counties having a discussion with. And the thought is to have 5 or 6 of these countywide, including at least one here in the city. Potentially 2. I would like to see 2. Don't know if I can talk the county into that. But that was one of the concepts for these cooperative projects. And that's about it. I mean, if you, the governing body, the residents, have any thoughts or ideas, would love to hear them. Please feel free to email me. My email is up there. You all know my email. Most of you know my phone number. So you can, feel free to contact me. Is there any questions?
Okay, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. How much do the kiosks cost?
So the kiosks, you basically lease the kiosks. You don't buy them. And there's 2 different ways to do it. You can either lease it, and the company that I've been talking to, that I actually met at a conference that I went to, is based in Herndon. And it's wireless, so they actually can track how much of the goods are in there. And when it gets low, they would restock them. Now, we would actually have to pay a restocking fee and pay for, let's say, the Narcan, but they would actually restock them. The other thing, which is what Richmond is doing, because they have the manpower to do this, they lease the kiosks, but they do all the stocking themselves. So somebody has to go out there on a weekly basis and see if there's, how empty it is, or just like a Coke machine or something like that. I personally don't think that's a great idea for us, because that's quite manpower intensive. And I don't think, that's a good use of our manpower. And especially if we're doing 5 or 6 of those countywide or regionally, it just gets kind of difficult, I think. The kiosk itself, and I'm thinking off the top of my head now because I didn't bring the numbers, but I have them back in my office. I believe the initial cost is like $1,200 a month or something like that, plus the items that go in there.
Okay.
But I have, and again, one of the reasons I'm hesitating because it depends on how many you get. So if regionally they get 6, 7, or 8, that's cheaper than if we just did it by ourselves. We could, and you just lost your thing again. We could. I'm not touching it. I'm not. We could do it by ourselves, but that gets more expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. That was helpful. Questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Any other jurisdictions, do they have any programs where it's the entire community beyond the harm reduction kiosks? Because I'm thinking that you do have elderly, and I saw that with my own father. Sometimes he would overdo the medicine. Sometimes the elderly can't see, or sometimes the elderly have grandchildren or adult children that come in and will take their narcotics. So I'm thinking also beyond the schools, just the whole community. We also have we have families here where the children go to private schools, they're homeschooled. So how other jurisdictions reaching everyone?
So as I said, I believe there's 6 or 7 different proposals for doing these partnerships. I don't know the details of them yet. I'll know them next week when I go to the meeting. But as the overview, I know at least one of them is a public relations campaign designed to reach the community as a whole in multiple languages, but including the elderly, families that don't. One of the things we've discovered, or I've discovered in doing this, is a lot of parents don't understand what opioids are. They don't know how to look for them, don't know how to recognize them if they were sitting in their kids' bedroom or something like that. And that's part of the education campaign, is to educate the families, not just the children, but the parents, what to look for. So that's one possibility. There's also there's several nationwide programs, and I'm trying to come up with a name and I can't right now, I apologize, but there's several nationwide programs that are designed to reach students. And I know one of the things that the region is looking at is to pay for those programs to go into our schools, including Manassas Park schools, and provide those programs there. That could be funded through these partnership programs also. And there's 1 or 2 others, and I'm sorry, but I just can't remember those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Comment? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say I really liked your idea of the student parent nights. I think that's really critical to get to the young children. before it becomes an issue and to educate their parents as well. However, I really liked Councilmember Hampton's idea of also reaching out to the elderly.
I mean, I think you have to reach out to everybody. And I think it's not just, I think one of the big issues that I've been seeing is the issue of language. So, you can't just do it in English. You have to do it in Spanish, in whatever the other languages are spoken. And I think people tend to think that you have to educate the users or the potential users, in other words, the children and the 20s. But I think you have to educate the elderly. You have to educate the parents. You have to, as you all know, I'm a paramedic also, and I've seen people overdose because grandma left she's got cancer and she's got pain meds and she left them on the counter and somebody got into that. And things that, there's a whole education campaign that has to go out with that.
Okay. Comments or questions?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with them. Community dialogue sessions along with the schools, I think that'll be the best use of these funds. Is this a one-time or is it?
The community dialogue?
No, these funds.
So the $70,000 we have, it's in the bank account.
Right.
We can use it all at once. It's up to us how we're going to spend it. It's totally up to us.
And that's it, no more other funds that
Oh,
are
no,
coming from the settlement?
there's funds, I mean, as I said, I just got notified over the weekend that there's 3,000 something, I can't remember the exact number, just over 3,000 that is coming in. It was a new settlement, and City of Manassas Park is getting $3,000 of that. We haven't received it yet, I believe, but it should be here any day. And that happens regularly, so we don't know. It depends on what the nationwide lawsuits, there's always new lawsuits and there's always new settlements. And I know Dean is on this call. I don't know if he has any additional information on that. But basically, I get emails from Dean saying, so-and-so just settled, and we expect, read this email, and at the bottom of the email it says Manassas Park is going to get X dollars. So I expect to get more. How much? I have no idea.
Okay. Yeah, we just got to remember that any projects we implement doesn't do recurring.
Right, and just as an example, I mean, the MAP clinic project, which I mentioned earlier, they know that, they asking for funds for 6 months, which is $25,000, and they would like to extend that for another 6 months, which would be a total of $50,000. But they know that that's the limit unless we get more funds. Right. And the same thing with the schools. The schools 2025, they know they want to do it at least 1 year and potentially more, as long as the funding is available.
Okay.
So to answer the question earlier, the most recent one is about $3,900. And to Francis' point, as long as these settlements are occurring, we can continue to expect some of it. I think the harder challenge outside implementing some of these projects is for our finance to track it year over year, because this is restricted funding and there's reporting requirements, et cetera. So
we if I may mention that, we have been getting information from the OAA about reporting requirements, which I've been sending to, there are no reporting requirements, direct reporting requirements for the money that we already have. However, we could get audited. I don't have to send a report to the OAA about the money the direct distributions we've gotten. But we could get audited, and I've been working with our accounting people so that they know exactly how the bank account has to look like and all that. And we've been working together to make sure we cross our T's and dot our I's.
Okay. Follow-up?
No.
Okay.
I think
Any other questions? No? Comments or questions? Thank you very much. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, when do we need to make a decision to use the funds?
So
Sorry, I have a question.
I'm sorry. The governing body does not need to make a decision on this. It'll be up to the city manager to determine, what we want to use that money for. The money we already have.
Right.
yeah, tonight the intent was to show you that we have this money, that we need to spend it on opioid mitigation efforts, and these are some of our ideas. And certainly, if you have more ideas for the future, let us know, but there's no vote required.
Well, and then on that note, then the kiosk, then, I mean, that's a cost that would be every month you're paying the lease?
So
So-
right now, we haven't committed to any of the courses of action yet.
Okay.
These are just proposal.
And it wouldn't, and if we did something on the, pardon me, I have to pull up my notes, on the individual distribution, which is the kiosks, that would be not coming out of the budget.
Okay.
We would apply for, there's $22,518 that the opioid abatement authority is holding for us right now in our name, but that we have to apply for. And my idea would be that if we did the kiosks or any of the other 5 things that they're thinking about, we would apply to the OAA for that money and use that to fund that. It wouldn't have anything to do with the budget.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, our next presentation is on the quiet zone.
Okay, Sarah, could you just replug in the connection to the last one?
While Sarah is pulling that up, so I believe Calvin is briefing this, and over the last several months, we've had some inquiries about the train noise, and this was a topic that was discussed a while back, but for new residents that are moving in, they may not know, so we wanted to refresh everyone's memory.
Thank you.
All right, I'll let Calvin take it away. I'm just merely clicking buttons up here tonight.
Okay, welcome, Calvin.
Good evening, Mayor Russell, Vice Mayor Mensing, members of council, residents, staff, and guests. I'm Calvin O'Dell, the Director of Community Development. I'm sorry I couldn't be there live this evening, but thank you for having me virtually. As Keith was mentioning, we have been receiving some complaints from some of our newest residents and our newest homes here in Manassas Park, at the village of Manassas Park. They're upset about the volume and consistency of the train horns. And wanted to brief everyone tonight on, a little historical context about the quiet zone as we pursued it before, some of the things that have happened with the quiet zone pursued in the city of Manassas Park, and what we can do moving forward. The trains, and by the FRA rules, Federal Railroad Administration rules, I believe it's chapter 42 or something like that, they have all of their policies and procedures spelled out in the Federal Register, and there are 2 types of triggers for train horn soundings that we have in Manassas Park, and we don't have a linear long stretch of the rail section, but we have 2 of those things that trigger train horns, and that's an at-grade crossing, in our case Manassas Drive, and then also passengers' platforms or rail yards. We have a commuter rail platform, which is a passenger platform. So right in the same place in the middle of our city, we have 2 things that trigger, by federal rule, those train horns to sound. And that applies to all trains, freight trains, as well as passenger trains. Quiet zones, I'm sure that these residents have gone to, the internet and used the search engines and the AI, and they come up with this very quick and simple solution, which is called a quiet zone. And there is a new rule, quiet zone, that is still available. Requires you to pursue it through the actual track owners, in our case Norfolk Southern. But there are policies and procedures in place. There are improvements that need to be made before you can get a quiet zone designation. There are certain standard safety improvements and alternative safety improvements and things like that. And we've been down this road before, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the next slide. But we have those 2 things that trigger train horns to sound here, and quiet zones only apply, that quiet zone exemption that you can get that's spelled out in the Federal Railroad Administration's policies is only applied to at-grade crossings. It does not apply to actual passenger rail stations or rail yards. It's simply for at-grade crossings. Now, Manassas, they have a pre-rule quiet zone. They have what's a grandfathered type of quiet zone. They weren't required back when they pursued their quiet zone to put in any sort of safety measures or alternative standard safety measures or alternative safety measures. So they're what's called a pre-rule quiet zone. And then I've heard rumor, I cannot confirm, that the trains do not sound their horns as they're coming through the passenger station at night. I do know, I eat over in Old Town Manassas, and I can guarantee you that those trains sound their horns when they're coming towards the VRE station. The passenger station there in Old Town Manassas, they definitely sound their horns during the day, but I do think that somehow in their pre-rule quiet zone setup, they did get some sort of an exemption for train horns at night. On to the next slide. We did have an RCIP, and we did have a revenue sharing agreement with VDOT to pursue a quiet zone, and we actually submitted that application or started that process in 2014 and 2015. We worked with Belmont Consulting to design the standard safety improvements and the alternative safety improvements, and the very next step for us was to have an on-site meeting with Norfolk Southern staff. And it was when we met with Norfolk Southern staff out on the site that they immediately said, you guys have a problem here. And they said, it's not that you can't put in these safety improvements, it's not that you don't have an at-grade crossing that will qualify for a quiet zone, but within essentially 200 feet of our at-grade crossing, we also have a passenger platform, the VRE commuter rail station. So they told us at the time that, you know, even if we were to get a quiet zone classification at the at-grade crossing, it would not exempt the trains, the freight trains, or the VRE trains from their requirement to sound their horns as they approach the commuter station. So we brought this information back to the governing body, gave a presentation. I believe it was Drew Williams that presented it, and I think Dean was a part of that presentation too, where we explained that, look, we can go ahead and spend $35,000, $40,000 putting in these safety improvements, which were essentially delineators to keep people from dodging the rail arms. But we weren't going to get a true quiet zone. The trains were still going to have to sound for entering and leaving that passenger station. So at the time, we discontinued our quest for the quiet zone designation and started pursuing some sort of exemption for operating hours for the VRE, for the actual entering of, the station, entering of the passenger way. We tried to use a little political assistance. We reached out to the office of Congresswoman Comstock, the office of Senator Jeremy McPike, and we asked them if they could help us in our sort of quest to be granted a waiver for this requirement to sound train horns when you're entering in a passenger platform. And the whole time was based on the premise that VRE does not operate at night. So at least at night, in a similar fashion to the way the city of Manassas is set up, could we get a waiver granted from the FRA or from Norfolk Southern? And I believe it would have to be through FRA because Norfolk Southern was very adamant about the fact that they can't make any decision that violates FRA policy. So this would have to be an exemption, a sort of waiver through the FRA. And we didn't get any real assistance from the political people we reached out to. There didn't seem to be a lot of interest. It is a safety concern, and we didn't get a lot of help at the time. And so our quiet zone project just sort of fell to the wayside and died on the vine, if you will. And so today, where we stand is we didn't get our quiet zone like we were seeking in 2015. We didn't pursue that option any further, but then we had the Village at Manassas Park come in. And the Village at Manassas Park was supposed to be a community that was oriented around the VRE commuter rail station, and they needed as much room as possible to build as many units as possible. And normally there would be a required 100 feet buffer from the homes, between the homes and the railroad tracks, or at least the homes in the right of way. But during the permitting process, they were approved for only a 25-foot buffer. And so the homes are a little bit closer than they would have had to have been without that waiver. But what Stanley Martin and Norton Scott, researched was types of sound mitigation that they could put in when they were building these units to try to, I think train horns by the rule have to be somewhere between like 94 and 110 decibels. So they use those figures from the actual federal rule to try to design improvements on certain units that would reduce the impacts of the train noise. And some of that was, fiber cement siding in lieu of vinyl. They used what we call pack rail to provide air gaps between the insulation and the drywall. And for the schedule of units that actually were going to take the brunt of the noise from the tracks, those had windows and doors with higher soundproofing ratings. And that was all installed by Stanley Martin during the construction process, and it was all inspected by a third party, specifically for this, knowing that this would be an issue someday that someone might complain. They actually had all of these improvements inspected by a third party. And also those people that purchased homes at the Village of Manassas Park were told that, their home is near an active railroad and there is going to be train noise. But we're at the point now where everybody seems to agree that it's a little inconvenient. I think we have some people working at night who would like to sleep during the day, and that's when there's more train activity, so there's more horns during the day. And I think it's really inconvenient for some people. So we've been asked what we can potentially do. So we could re-engage with Norfolk Southern and try to establish a quiet zone. That still, we would probably get the same answer from Norfolk Southern, that even if they were to grant us the quiet zone designation at the at-grade crossing, that they would still have to sound the horns at the commuter platform, which would only represent a very small reduction in the number and type of horn blast that people would hear. But we can also, reinstate our effort to reach out to state and federal elected officials to try to get a waiver from FRA based on VRE operating hours so that the trains wouldn't have to sound their horns, at least at night when they're passing through the passenger station. And, the last thing we can really recommend here is that we can provide information to residents how to further soundproof their homes, or what permitting would be required for the types of improvements they seek out and things like that. But that's where we stand as staff. We didn't finish out the project in 2015. It was a whole city decision not to pursue that project. We could pick those pieces back up and try to get a quiet zone designation. And we could also keep working with our elected officials to try to get a waiver so that we don't hear these train horns at night. But that's all we really have, and that's...
Okay. Thank you, Calvin. I would think it would be important to pursue both the waiver from the FRA and the at-grade crossing. I would think. Comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a couple of concerns about establishing a quiet zone. My concern is that these train horns are there for a reason. At night, we get at least 3 Norfolk Southern gravel trains coming through, and it's dark. And if they're not sounding their horn, and if something failed with the grade crossing, there would be no indication that the train is coming. I would be concerned about that. Second, if we, it has to do with the commuter platform. When the VRE is there and they're stopped, the arms go down. The VRE is stopped, the arms go back up. That train starts moving before those arms are triggered again. And it's about halfway to the cars before those arms finally go down. And the only way you know that thing is moving is because it's sounding its horn. So I do think that these train horns are not just a nuisance, they're a safety
Yeah.
feature. So I would be very hesitant to get rid of the train horns.
That's a very good point, excellent point. I had always heard that the reason for blowing the horn is also if the brakes should fail on the train, it would overrun the platform.
It would, yes.
It would, yeah,
absolutely.
it would go right through the intersection, they're so close together.
They also have a concern
Yeah.
in the fall with the leaf oil getting on the tracks, and they get
Okay.
slippage from that. So that is,
Yeah.
you reminded me, that is another
Okay,
reason why
okay, yeah,
they might not stop where they're intending to stop.
yeah. Councilmember Moore?
Yeah, I was just wondering, how did we as a city respond to the 5 homes or individuals that complained about the zoning? Did we send them a letter? What did it entail?
I can go ahead and answer part of that. For a couple of the residents that were put in touch with my office, we explained the history of our quiet zone attempt last time and answered the basic question of what has the city done or what does the city intend to do, and the way we answered that was there is a history here. We did have a capital project, it was funded, we did have a revenue sharing agreement with VDOT to execute quiet zone improvements, but we also explained that, there was this issue that Norfolk Southern brought up of having to sound the horns because of the commuter stations. So for the couple that got to my office directly or indirectly, they were given the history of the quiet zone pursuit as an answer to their question on whether or not we could establish a quiet zone.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off what he said, it was usually a collaborative effort on our response because it would really depend on who the email went to. Most of them ended up on Steve's email inbox just because he's in charge of transportation, and then, he would toss it over to me and we'd kind of, massage it together and come up with a written response via email. For the most part, seemed, happy with our response, and we haven't had, further push on our end. That doesn't mean that, it may not come to you.
Okay.
And the other question was the windows and doors with higher soundproofing. Are you saying that it's double pane, Calvin, or exactly how? Can you explain that a little bit more about the doors and windows being higher soundproofing by Northern Scott or Stanley Martin?
So almost all windows nowadays to meet energy code standards have to be double paned, but there is thickness of glass panes and the type of gas that they're filled with, the space between the panes, all of that, the type of glass, thickness of glass, windows are measured by what's called an R value, and that essentially is an insulated value. So by using a higher R value window, you're getting better sound insulation as you get better heat and cold insulation, and as you get better sunlight insulation. So the windows, I'm pretty sure, were just a standard increase in R value, but the doors would have been a higher insulated value, a different film material. There were steel doors instead of like a cheaper plastic material, and the same would be with the windows. I think those were actually a fiberglass material instead of a basic vinyl frame. But we didn't inspect those directly for the conditions. Those were third-party inspected by a company hired by Stanley Martin to actually certify that all these sound attenuation measures have been done. The biggest, you're always going to have sound intrusion through windows and doors, no matter how insulated you think they are. But one of the biggest things that they really did was using the fiber cement siding and standing off the drywall from the insulation in the walls, creating that air gap with the hat channel on those units. Those are all pretty common things that you see like in crowded apartment buildings and things where you're trying to reduce the noise between units, hotel rooms, things like that, when you're trying to attenuate the sound between units. And they put a lot of those practices into place at that subdivision on the units that were directly facing or had faces that faced the tracks.
So as a follow-up on my last question, Calvin, I appreciate your answers, and yours as well. Appreciate that, sir. Have we done any testing, any decibel testing? Have we gone to any of these units and said, you know, here, hook up the machines and see what the sound volume is in those units?
Not that I'm aware.
Decibel testing.
Right, not that I'm aware of. Calvin, do you know of any?
No, I do not have a decibel meter. I believe our police have a decibel meter for noise, noise ordinance violation purposes. But I do know that the train noise, the horn noise itself by federal code is supposed to be, I think, between 94 and like 110 decibels. So that's what you're trying to attenuate to a unit that's only 25 feet off the tracks.
Okay, it would be interesting to know.
I agree there. It
Yes.
would be very interesting to know. So maybe we can offer that to the 5, or one of the 5 may be willing to
Yeah.
be tested and see
Yeah.
what the decibel level is.
I can reach out
Good
to them.
question.
We have their email addresses and I think their phone numbers in some cases, and I can try and coordinate that with the PD.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Calvin.
Any other, yes, ma'am?
Just really quick, do we know if it's the noise or the rumbling from the trains, or is it both?
It's the noise.
Okay, so I asked that because some years ago, when I worked in DC, I worked at the Reporters Building, which was right across the street from the LaFont VRE station. And so we were dealing with Amtrak trains, the VRE, both of the VREs, both lines of the VRE, and a number of the trains that are pulling in, what do you call it, orange juice, the freight trains. And at first, yes, it was annoying, but after a while, we got accustomed to it. Then I worked a little ways down the street at another building that was retrofitted. You couldn't really hear anything. And maybe it was a little bit less because we weren't right at the train, weren't at the station, but that noise does carry. I couldn't hear anything. And I know in the Reporters Building, there were certain rooms in there that the agency that I was a contractor for at that time, retrofitted so they could have conference calls and that noise wouldn't bleed in. So that's why I'm asking, because sometimes we would feel the rumbling, sometimes we'd feel the noise, but after a while, we got accustomed to it.
Okay.
But as far as, my other question though is to Calvin. Calvin, do you remember last time how much hours was spent by the staff to pursue the route through the elected officials?
So I initially started the project in around 2013 or something like that. Started working with VDOT on the revenue sharing agreement. I did the first iteration of what they call the quiet zone calculator, which is where you go in and you find out the average train speed, you decide what improvements you need to put in place. But then, I'd say probably at that point I had close to 120 hours, but then Drew Williams took over the project, and he got the contract with Belmont for the actual design. We expended money on the design of the improvements, and then everything came to a crashing halt when, Norfolk Southern met us on site. So I'd say, probably a couple hundred hours and around $15,000 invested in engineering services.
Okay, and could we still leverage the engineering services from almost a decade ago, or we'd have to do that again if we pursued this?
Well, we'd have to rerun the quiet zone calculator, make sure that nothing has changed as far as like average train speed or the improvements that are required based on the average train speed. But hopefully it would still just be the delineators that would need to be put down, and possibly, since Bowman is still with us, they would be willing to refresh that design. We have some cost savings there by using the same firm and just refreshing the design.
Okay, thank you.
Just
And then one more thing.
Yes.
I do agree with regarding the safety issue, and I'm someone that when I do have to take the VRE, I'm on the first train, and it is really dark when you're going through there.
Really?
And there are some people that do cross that railroad in the morning, by because they live in apartments and they're pedestrians. We're also looking at now, the days get shorter, so when folks are getting home, they're going to be walking across the street. So there, I do have a concern.
Yeah, yeah. How fast does the train go?
Calvin, are you aware of the speed of the trains?
So the freight trains typically are traveling faster, I think the fastest moving trains are the actual Greyhound train or the Amtrak trains. But the freight trains and the Amtrak trains, when you blend them in with the VRE trains that actually stop right next to the tracks, I believe our average train speed was only like 25 miles an hour through the at-grade crossing. That's the only real data that's available from FRA. When you log in to the calculator, they know the average train speed, but I don't remember if they listed a maximum and a minimum.
Okay. It would be interesting to know the max and the min, especially at our at-grade and yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Thank you, Helen, for the presentation. I remember the history because, Ms. Mayor, you and I were here and we voted on this, and the reason we pulled back the quiet zone is I remember there was going to be a series of orange sticks sticking up on both sides between the quiet zone. I remember the FRA hasn't approved anyone since the 90s, and it was almost impossible to get this. You'd have to put it in as a rider or an earmark, and Congress, I don't think one congressman could, it'd just be very difficult to pass. So I know that's why there wasn't a lot of interest on either side, 'cause I think we talked to Congresswoman Wexler when she first came, and there was no interest at all. Unfortunately, this shouldn't have been approved. We should have kept the 100-foot buffer. It's just realistic. Why would you put a house next? But we want to get as much money as possible, and this is where we are. What should have been done is developers should put sound walls on the entire thing. That's expensive. Should have been negotiated. Wasn't. I don't support making it a quiet zone because it's a safety issue. It's dark there. There's cars. There are people who walk on tracks, even though the sound goes backwards. But you have to have some type of safety measure. Unfortunately, that happens. And so I don't support spending this time. We spent a serious amount of time back in 2015. I didn't know it was 15,000, but it was just a lot of time, and we didn't get any additional results. So unfortunately, I feel sorry for them. I think eventually you're going to have to look at sound barriers, similar to what you see on the highway, and to make it 4 stories onto the track, just bad planning. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any questions? No. Comments? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just wanted to specify, I looked it up, there's 4 trains that would come in the morning before the quiet zone would expire. So the city of Manassas' quiet zone ends at 7 a.m. and we have 4 trains leaving the platform before 7 a.m. So that kind of just points out my safety concern again.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
I have a final follow-up. Who paid for the third-party inspector? Was it the city or was it Stanley Martin?
I think it was Stanley Martin. Is that correct, Calvin?
Yeah, I believe that was in their deal with Norton Scott, that they had to provide third-party inspection of those.
So the wolf is guarding the hen house. I'd really like to see, if any of the 5 are interested, a decimal check in the homes.
Certainly.
To see if in fact the sounding proofing was indeed put in and it's doing what it said it would do for the residents.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah, is your microphone turned on?
Yes, am I not talking? I'm not close enough, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Yes. Do you have
Well, just the comments off what everybody's saying. If we're designating a quiet zone, the next steps would be enhanced safety features, right? So all your safety concerns would be touched upon if we're moving forward, such as regulating the arms, adding more flashing lights, not just at the intersection, but also on the platform. I don't ride the rails in the States, but when I go overseas, on the platform, they have blinking lights for deaf people and for riders to know that there's a train approaching. There's also gates in some of these platforms to avoid them going too close to the rails when the train's approaching. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the enhanced features that can be added. I don't know about the cost, but that we can talk about that later down the road, if we're going to move forward with the quiet zone. So it's not just we're going to ask for a quiet zone, but we're going to keep the same safety features. That doesn't make sense, right? There'll be a fence along the rail as well, so pedestrians don't walk across or whatever. But I think when 10 years ago, we had no development down there, right?
Right.
Now we have development all across the city, so time has changed. We have more residents in that circle. So I think opening a new negotiations or discussion with FRA, Northern, Southern, or politicians or whoever we need to is we should consider that.
Calvin, do you know if there are grants to be obtained for enhanced safety features, or would Norfolk Southern have to take care of that?
So we did pose that question to Merchant McIntyre, and they have sent us some information on a potential rail safety grant program, but they're not 100% sure that just these quiet zone improvements would qualify. We haven't finished that discussion yet. I brought that up to them at a meeting about a month ago, and they've shared with us the grant information and when the deadline would be, and we need to just follow up with discussion about what our chances would actually be of achieving money just for a quiet zone designation.
Thank you.
One last question.
Yes.
So Hasib, when you're talking about the flashing lights, Metro has that. VRE, on the platforms, they don't have anything like that.
Right.
But my question is, do we know who owns the platforms, the VRE platforms? Is that us? Is that VRE?
It's the VRE.
Okay. So the idea, then my other question is, then we'd have to think about the impact on the cost impact if we to make those changes. Is it just going to be at Manassas Park? Is it going to be all the rest of them? And in the long run, how's it going to affect the pocket of the riders? Because right now they've already gone up. I think a one-day round trip is close to $20, if not more.
Well, right, yeah, like I said, I don't know the cost, what it would be to implement these, and what the future would look like if they're going to increase fares. But if we're talking about safety, enhanced safety and features, and even if it's not a quiet zone, is a plus to me. Even if they don't want to do a quiet zone, but put in more safety features. Not having blinking lights just for deaf people in any of the platforms here in the States or in Virginia, I can't talk about other states, it's kind of odd to me, but, you said it was on the...
It's on the Metro. But the other, I've ridden the trains in other parts of the country.
Right.
I haven't come across where they have the lights on the tracks.
Yeah, so they, because some people, a lot of people, when I go overseas, is they cross the railroad at the platform. They jump down, they walk, they kind of sit there, mingle, but they have lights. They don't sound the horn, but they have lights and that all over the platform. And then people know it's coming, and then they disperse. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I would like to pursue it.
But that wouldn't be the issue. The issue is not that. It's the sound that people are complaining about. If you're deaf, you don't hear the sound.
No, I'm talking about just doing a quiet zone. Yeah, I'm not talking about lights. I'm just talking about the quiet zone in general.
I would really like to see the extent of the problem and we test the 5 houses that are willing to let us come in and do a decimal test to see what the magnitude of the issue is. Because we're just talking theoretical issues right now. And it'd be nice to have data and facts.
Yes, agreed.
And how many homes do we have over there? Do we know?
Let me circle back to you. I forgot the number top of mind.
So there were 5, you said 5 complaints?
Yes.
Okay.
Did I hear right that the consensus is to get a decimal reading and then come back with?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
No, I understand the point. We could hear it all the way, where we live.
True.
This is right next to it. I don't think any mitigation effort is going to stop.
Well, we told them that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. So I don't see.
We're hearing it from the bridge, because it wraps around us, and they're sounding the horn across the bridge, because there have been accidents there. So we're not hearing it from the station necessarily. What you hear at night, it wakes me up to, is the bridge.
Which bridge?
Over from Clifton to us. That's where they're sounding the horn, where it's the loudest for us in our houses, because that's actually very close to where we are.
And I think where I live, I think I hear when they pull into the station.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, either way, they're so close to the railroads, even if you put a thick barrier between them, you're going to hear that horn. It's literally right on the track.
To some degree. I mean, having literally worked next to the train tracks, been in an office where there was no soundproofing, and an office where there was soundproofing in the same building, the soundproofing office, you could barely hear it.
I'm just trying to figure out what's the end game after this. Then.
No, we'll figure that out when we get
No,
the
after the
information.
decimal reading. Like, are we going back to Stanley Martin or?
Well, then we have another discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it would seem to me that it would be really helpful to know exactly the decibel reading in those 5 units, and then take it from there.
Right.
Yeah. Is everyone in agreement?
Yes.
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 I will get
Okay.
that coordinated.
We're all in
Thank you.
agreement, Calvin? Are you there, Calvin?
you.
Okay, okay.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
Okay. Any other last-minute comments or questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Calvin. Thank you, Sarah. Okay. Our next presentation is Domestic Violence Awareness and Resources.
Good evening, Mayor. Can you hear me? Sorry. Good evening, Mayor, members of the governing body. I'm the City Legislative and Legal Coordinator, and tonight I will be presenting on domestic violence awareness and resources in our community. How do we define domestic violence? I thought it'd be most useful to reference the State Department of Social Services because it focuses both on a pattern of abuse and control of a family member.
Could you speak directly into the, yeah, okay, thanks.
Is that better?
That is better.
Okay, perfect. It makes clear any family member can be a victim and delineates the types of domestic abuse, including physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, and economical. Thank you. How can domestic abuse be identified? Again, the State Department of Social Services has some helpful guidance. Obviously, the first and most obvious sign is physical violence, but also an abuser is seeking power and control over their victim. This includes financial control, criticism of their partner in front of others, and downplaying the emotions of their partner's feelings. Also not listed is control of access to the outside world. And before I get into specific resources for victims, the State Department of Social Services provides guidance for identifying victims of domestic abuse. Be on the lookout if you notice injuries that don't make sense or clothing that may mask signs of abuse. If someone you know is no longer allowed to visit their family or friends, and if they are rarely seen in public, especially without their partner. I've listed some other examples of this on the PowerPoint for reference. Here are specific city resources that can assist you or someone you know who may be a victim of domestic violence. Of course, if something's an emergency or you suspect or think someone is experiencing physical violence, please call 911. We also have our team, our human services team, consisting of the Department of Social Services and our housing coordinator, who is available to help. City staff work together to create the domestic violence awareness flyer that is located up on this PowerPoint. It has been pushed out on the city website and social media page for reference as well. Our partners in the county and county nonprofits have resources to support victims of domestic violence and abuse, as shown on this slide, including a domestic violence hotline that provides 24/7 support. And finally, we've listed regional, state, and national resources to assist victims of domestic violence and abuse. Any comments or questions?
Okay. Comments or questions? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Kelly, first of all, I appreciate the presentation. It's good that we're making aware to our community the resources that are available around domestic violence and the different types of domestic violence, other than the ones we see portrayed oftentimes on TV and things like that. There's other levels of domestic violence. But I also want to highlight September 30th. There's going to be a forum on domestic violence at the community center by Delegate Maldonado, myself, Councilmember Amaya, and our Vice Mayor Mensing. So people should come out 6 o'clock to 7:30 on the 30th of September. And we're going to talk about, it's a forum on domestic violence and resources, and hear from various panels about domestic violence that serve our community and what they have to offer.
Yeah.
So it'd be
Okay.
great if people can come out and be part of that.
That's wonderful, thank you, and we can push that out on social media as well.
Oh, please, yes, we'll get you the
Absolutely.
information.
And Lena, could you please advertise that, because as many governing body members should attend as possible? Okay, thank you. Excellent presentation, thank you. I have a question. Did I hear you correctly that there might be a pamphlet, like a hard copy pamphlet, in addition to all the electronic resources?
We can certainly create one.
Yeah, it was just,
Yeah, and we can keep it down, if it's okay with the city manager, we can keep it down at the front desk. I
Yes.
believe there's already some, I believe actually the flyer that was referenced is already printed out down there, but
Okay.
I can provide copies of this as well.
okay, that's good. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh,
I just
go
have
ahead.
one. You know, sometimes at the airports, when you're in the restroom, there's the flyer on the door about human trafficking. Perhaps we could put this in the restroom at the community center, just kind of out there, just to remind people that it's available.
Excellent idea.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That
Awesome,
was
thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. Consent agenda consists of the minutes of August 27th and August 30th, 2024. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, moving on to unfinished business, 10A, affordable housing policy. Who does that?
I guess I'll take this.
Okay,
This was presented as part of the public hearing for the sale of parcel 1A2 a couple weeks ago. And the presenter is Yvette Monty. She is not with us tonight, but what you see before you is what was presented, except that after that meeting, we got input from a couple of governing body members about veterans, and I think it was discussed, so we were asked if we would put that in there. It's in there, but only because, so you can see where it is. If you don't want it, we can take it out, we can put it back the way it was, but we put it in there mainly for discussion purposes, if you guys are willing to consider that. It talks about a point system. The point system would be created, and it doesn't change the policy at all. It's just the way it would actually be implemented. There'd be a point system that'd be created, and there would be a point given for veteran status. So that's really the only change for what was presented during that public hearing.
okay. Any comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
So after we last met, I reached out to a colleague of mine, actually a former colleague that's very involved in she's a veteran advocate. She actually goes up on the Hill. She's very well known within the veteran community. She's also on the board of directors of the National Council of Homeless Veterans. And she gave me some information that I think underscores the importance of giving some veterans some priority. One of them, she said, through the National Council of Homeless Veterans, they're now fielding calls from aging veterans and their widows that they're unable to pay their mortgages or rents because of the rising costs. The other information I have is really about not so much the veterans, but those that are currently in service. They're finding that right now that most service members, upwards of 25% are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. They too, just like many other Americans, are facing some housing and food instability as well. But at the end of the day, it's a way to give back to our veterans.
Yeah, the homeless veteran situation is terrible.
It is.
It's awful. Yes, yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great movement forward to give a point system, and particularly for the veterans in our community to have an extra point. But I would also ask, Dean, and you mentioned that the point system was going to be developed. So I'm assuming there's going to be other categories that one would qualify for points. And if that's the case, then I would hope we would have another point system or point awarded for individuals that are disabled. Because just like our veterans, they also have a very difficult time finding housing that meets their needs with disability and ADA requirements in the units themselves. And so I think it's important that not only for our veterans, which have done our service, but our disabled, which is our most oftentimes individuals in our community that are low income and can't afford standard market rate housing. So I would ask that we do a point for disabled as well.
And if I could just respond to that, I didn't come up with the points, and that was the vet's answer to allow for the veterans. I think it's a great idea, but there may be other things you guys want points for as well as this develops. I know that vet's talking about having a program, in this program, something for ADA, so, you know, American with Disability Act, so maybe first floor units that have, you know, special ramps and such for people who have disabilities. So I think this is a work in progress. This was done kind of quickly to try and prepare for the sale of this parcel of 1A2. So it was kind of cobbled together rather quickly. It hadn't been discussed for a while, but then a vet had to kind of pull it together. So it's your policy. So you tell us what you want in it and we'll make it happen. But what we have tonight is just basically what we need to get moving forward with the sale, so we can make sure we have the ADU and WD units in those.
Well, how difficult would it be to add a sentence referencing disabled individuals in our community getting a point?
Not difficult at all. If you guys want to do that, we can certainly do that. Vote on this. You could vote on it subject to that requirement that be added to the policy.
I'd like to do that, amend it.
Okay, is there consensus?
I have a question for Daryl, though.
Yeah.
Because I know your background is housing.
Yes.
And I know larger jurisdictions tend to have their own housing authority, and this is part of it. What is the best practice that you've seen in your years in housing as far as policy?
Well, I think this document, this policy here is definitely leaning towards best practices as far as the ADU. It probably doesn't go as far as I would like it to go, but it's a good start for Manassas Park and for our community. There's other things that we can do to require below market rate housing of developers, but I'd say this is a great first start.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just, hopefully my colleagues agree that we should add a point for the disabled residents in our community.
Point for disabled?
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Mike?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, unanimous.
And to Dee's point,
If I could just ask I'm sorry, go ahead.
and to Dee's point, it's a work in progress, so staff will bring back the scheduled points with the categories, so you guys can see the priorities, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
And
Okay,
I'd like to ask, though, if I could just real quick, Daryl, when you say disability, though, there's many levels of disability. Would it be any disability? Who would designate the disability? There are different agencies that do designate disabilities. We have in the city code, we have a disability definition for people to get tax relief, for instance. So would it be any disability? Would it be, I don't know how it is outside the military, but the military has a service-connected disability rating that can go up to 100%, it can be 10%, based upon what the disabilities are. Do you want us to just give it to a vet and let her kind of do the research and see what's best, or do you have something in mind?
Thank you, Dean. That's a good question. Yvette can do the research, but I tend to lean towards how Social Security defines disability, whether an individual is getting an SSI check as opposed to an SSA. They've been determined to be disabled by the federal government, and there's a category on what the definition, how it's defined. But again, I would defer to Yvette to do the research and come back. And I'm sure we can, at this dais, could all agree once she comes back with that research.
Do you want to approve the policy tonight as is with the direction to bring something back within the next month or so that has that additional language that you could amend the policy at the time?
I would be fine with that, Dean, so long as it comes back within a timely manner, because I know we're all busy. So yes, that would be fine if, we can get a time certain within a month or two that this document comes back to us for revision.
I don't.
I think Yvette's out on
Right.
Yeah,
So
she is.
that's a good point, so.
And
She's
and we
out
don't
till the end
know
of the
what
month,
her-
at like the
what her
23rd or something.
Workload is.
Right.
Yeah.
So just long, 3 months, 6 months,
She's
something like that.
passionate about it. She'll
Oh.
get it done.
3 months,
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah, 6 is too long.
6 is too long, yes.
Okay.
I've got a quick question, it's for Dean. Dean, in order for us to make sure that any housing development that we may approve tonight and until, in this point, we have to have a policy in place, right? To ensure that there's ADU? Okay.
Okay.
That was my point, so that's why we asked to flip the two items in section 10, because I'd like to get a policy approved by you that we could then add as an exhibit to the purchase and sale agreement. And then we could just say, that is the current one, and it can be amended from time to time. I guess, I don't know how they look at that with the open-ended thing, but we could just let them know that we might have a disability component also. And I don't think they would really care. All they care about is the ADU, WDUs, the numbers. I don't think they'd really care about the point system we use, so maybe that's not even an issue.
Yeah. Dean, so, for example, if someone is a disabled veteran, do they get 1 point for being a veteran and 1 point for being
Yes.
disabled?
Yes.
Is that how that works?
Yes,
Okay.
so that's how Social Security includes that as
They
well.
would get
Yes.
higher up on the list.
Yeah.
The person who's just disabled. They would be higher up on the list than the person who's just disabled.
Okay,
A
gotcha.
disabled veteran would be.
Yes. Okay, good.
The only other comment I would add for the ADA units is that it's typically more expensive to construct those. I know the percentage is small when you rack and stack all these criterias, but it is slightly more expensive, so it could come at a cost to whatever other transaction we happen to deal.
Well, I think, Keith, we have two separate issues here. We have one, which is a point system for a disability when deciding whether or not they get the ADU or the WDU. And the second one would be the ADA policy, that we maybe at least a certain percentage of the ADUs would be ADA accessible. That's something that the vet's going to have to kind of flesh through as well.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments? Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'm just a question about, so that these units, the ADU and the WDU, is city-owned assets?
No, they're not city-owned. The city is contributing a portion of the purchase price towards the ADUs, and so there's an ownership component to it. And then if they, when they sell them, there's a percentage of that sale that comes back to the city that Yvette has proposed for a trust fund to be used for affordable dwelling units or for affordable housing. But it's not, they won't be owned by the city. The city will just have an interest in them as far as how they can be sold and what happens when they are sold.
So initially, a buyer comes, they qualify for one of the units, the city will pay 50%, and then they are required to get financing for the rest?
No, that's not. So the city is already, but when we sell the land, the city is discounting the sales price so that we can get these WDUs. So the price, so the next item on the agenda, you'll notice the purchase price there. Had we not had the ADU, WDU requirement, the purchase price would have been higher. So the city has foregone a certain amount of money in the purchase price to secure these units. And the requirement then is, and we'll have covenants recorded in the land records, the requirement would be then when they sell it, they have to basically pay back a portion to the city because they, we don't want them reaping the reward. We don't want someone getting an ADU unit, turn around in 5 years and selling it at full market value and just making a windfall profit at the expense of taxpayers. The taxpayers are paying for this. We need to make sure we recoup some of that cost down the road when they sell the unit.
Okay, yeah,
They're
that
not
makes,
going to be ADU forever. At some point, they'll no longer be restricted, and they can sell it for market value. So this is anticipating that if that happening down the road.
and then regarding the, I guess, the workforce, was it the WDU, I think, dwelling
Yes.
units? Doesn't say anywhere that they have to be working within the city limits.
And I know they've been talking about that, but yeah, when Yvette actually proposed this, she said it would be any locality. If you want, we can make it just Manassas Park, but we might not have enough people to qualify. and then they just have these units just sitting out there. You could also make it, within the 3 jurisdictions that abut Manassas Park.
Yeah.
It's your call how you want to do it.
What if we put locality as a criteria, what are higher points?
Yes.
Yeah.
Point system.
Yeah, we could do a point system, yeah.
Yeah.
There's something we could
So
discuss.
point for
Yeah.
Manassas Park employees would get an additional point
Yes.
in this point system we're going to develop. Is that what you'd like
Yes.
to do?
Yes.
I think that'll be fair. I mean, I
Yeah.
think
Teachers
giving
get
our,
point,
our
yeah.
employees priority
Yes.
Yep, good point.
first. And
What-
then-
And it's a recruitment measurement.
Right.
What if they move on to another position and it's not in Manassas Park? Do we have any, requirement for them to continue to be employed by the city for a while, for a specific period of time?
Oh, to.
Oh, that might not even be legal.
Well, I
Is
know-
it legal, Dean?
Well, so the city's given up money for this, so it's a contractual obligation. So yeah, you can do that where they have to work there for a certain amount of time. But I think that these are all great ideas. But for our purposes with this one development, we really need to get something in place. Maybe we can
Yeah.
come back with proposed amendments.
Yeah.
These are all really, really good ideas. So I'd like to
Yeah.
kind of pull them all together, but I'd rather not make the changes on the fly here right at this
Right.
meeting.
No, I
We're bound
understand.
to make some mistakes.
I understand. I just want that to be a consideration for discussion.
Right. And I've actually seen that in other places, especially resort areas.
Uh-huh.
I remember being in Aspen, this was like 20 years ago, so their program may have changed since then. But they actually had housing for the employees in the hotels. I mean, clearly, you can't afford housing in Aspen. And you're required to, work there for a certain amount of time. And the moment you are no longer working in Aspen, then you are no longer allowed to have that housing, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, and I have one last question for these the sales prices. How do they come up with the sales price? Like per square foot or what? Like the one.
I'm going to have to defer to that. I don't know how she came up with this. I think it's the best practices from the other jurisdictions around us.
Okay, I'll be interested to see a formula or something just to see how they came up with these numbers.
I believe she based a lot of it from her experience with Fairfax housing.
Okay. All right.
And most of our program is Fairfax housing, and we've stolen very liberally from Fairfax.
All right, excellent. I think that's no more further questions.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up?
No.
Okay. Okay, it appears that we are ready, Dean. Thank you very much. The staff recommended motion is that the governing body approve and adopt an affordable dwelling unit, workforce dwelling unit policy as presented, subject to final review by city attorney.
Moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to 10.
Real quick, point
Yeah.
of clarification. So as presented, does that mean that you do or do not want any changes to what was presented, or you want us to have what was presented tonight in the agenda? That's the policy until we come back with some modifications later on down the road? Or did you want to stick something in there right away for disability?
I would recommend that we wait for the research before we change what was
Okay.
presented this evening. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, so long as we talked about a 3-month period, Dean, turnaround.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay?
gotcha. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, because as presented means as we presented.
Yes,
And we talked
yes.
about a lot of stuff, so.
Yeah, no, we have
Thank
to,
you.
yeah, for the record, it's clear. And everybody was nodding their head, so, okay. Going on to 10B, sale of parcel 1A-2 Belmont Reserve, the public hearing having been held on August 27th.
And I'm still up for this one. So the agreement that was presented to you at that meeting has stayed the same except on page 46 of your packet, which is page 7 of the agreement. We've just clarified the cash proffers payment process, when and how they're going to be determined. So they're going to pay a cash proffer in a lump sum within 60 days after the recordation of the approved final subdivision plat. So if you'll remember, they're not going to pay the sales price. We're not going to go to closing until they've already gotten to this point, basically. So they will have gotten all the way through to final site plan approval, and then we're going to go closing. So they should be able to turn that around. The subdivision plat will have been prepared already to prepare the site plan, because the site plan will show easements and everything, and the subdivision plat will also have those easements. And so when Mickey approves a site plan, she approves it conditionally upon recordation of that, of the subdivision plats, or easement plats and easement deeds. So they're gonna go hand in hand. So even though you'll note here that it says within 60 days after recordation, the approved final subdivision plat, we're gonna get it probably close to 60 days, maybe 70 days after we go to closing, because it's gonna all be ready to go, pretty much. Now, I will point out that they have a maximum amount of proffers based upon a certain unit count, but if they go above that unit count during the rezoning process, they will have calculated the proffers as slightly more based upon the amount shown there in that paragraph. And so the cash proffers will be, or that amount will be proffered then as part of the rezoning process. So we have contractual law, zoning law, kind of coming into play here. So those are the only changes. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, comments or questions? Comments or questions? Okay, no, apparently there are none. So the staff recommended motion is that the governing body approve and authorize the city manager to sign a purchase and sale agreement for the sale of 0.65582 acres of land, more or less legally described as parcel 1A-2 Belmont Reserve to Hovnanian Virginia Operations Incorporated as presented and subject to final city attorney review.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you, Dean. Okay, moving on to high-intensity crosswalk, activated crosswalk. Is that you, Calvin?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening again. It's Calvin O'Dell, the Director of Community Development. Here tonight to talk about the high-intensity activated crosswalk signal that would replace the standard mid-block crossing we have that would go from the proposed theater parcel over to 170 Market Street. We presented this back in April to the governing body with some more information on what exactly a hawk signal is. And based on that presentation, we're given instruction to go ahead and get this out to bid. We put the invitation to bid on the street on August 1st. We had a mandatory pre-bid meeting on August 13th, and we only had 2 actual installation vendors arrive at that and 1 supply vendor show up to the mandatory pre-bid. So we weren't expecting a lot of bid submissions. In the end, we only had 1 bid submission that we could actually accept, and that was in the amount of $332,000, $332,200. That was from a company called Ardent Company LLC. That is slightly over what we had, the engineer's estimate that we had for $259,566. But since this project is part of the downtown transportation infrastructure improvements, that's a series of earmarked projects all under one GL line. We do believe we still have the available money to fund this project due to savings on the streetscape project, which was also part of the downtown infrastructure improvements line. So staff's recommendation is that we go ahead and move forward with a contract with Ardent Company. Of course, because of unknowns, being that there's so many utilities out there, we do want to carry a 10% contingency. That's a $33,200 contingency. We would not probably have that money available in the actual downtown transportation infrastructure line. We would have a portion of that if we carried over the full remainder from FY24, but that would still leave an approximate $19,000 that would have to come from some other funding source if all of the projects stay on estimate. and we would recommend that the remainder of that contingency, should we need it, would be pulled from additional streets projects. But our recommendation is that we go ahead and move forward with the contract with Hardin in the amount not to exceed 365, or the contract amount of 332,200, but an amount not to exceed with the contingency of 365,420.
Thank you, Calvin. It's very interesting. Why was the initial estimate almost twice what the final estimate was?
I think in general, by the time we are still in an inflationary period, and I think it's hard to probably get new traffic signal information like in your blue books that engineering firms use to come up with estimates. There's probably not a ton of recent examples of the exact product we're looking for. We are looking for the black powder coating, the fluted poles to keep with the theme that already exists in the downtown at the intersection of Park Central Plaza, Market Street, and Manassas Drive. So I think that probably that black fluted pole and the black powder coating adds some cost. And I also think that you're probably limited in these Hawk suppliers, and I believe the supply side has probably increased their cost over the past year to 6 months. So wasn't terribly surprised to see that the engineering estimate is off. Sometimes engineering estimates are incredibly high, sometimes they're incredibly low. This was off, but I do think that it probably has something to do with the actual materials that we're looking for to match the downtown theme that we have right now.
Okay, thank you, Calvin. Thank you. Comments or questions? Comments or questions?
I
No?
just want to be the tester.
Huh?
I want to be the tester.
You want to be
Just-
the tester?
Yeah.
Just two quick comments, addition to this. One, once the construction started and it's finished, we'll have plenty of, I guess, sort of how to use the signal, because it can be complicated for those that have never used it. So we'll have a public information item on that. And then secondly, Calvin alluded to this, this is just part of really three-pronged effort for the downtown. The anchor business being one, beautification, which is the landscaping, the median mowing, all that stuff that you're seeing now. And then thirdly, with the safety, pedestrian safety focus with this, at some point we're gonna look at some of the median and make a safer turn lane, the angle parking. So it's really just one piece of a very multifaceted approach.
Okay, thank you. No comments or questions? Okay. The staff recommended motion is that the governing body approve and authorize the city manager to sign the necessary contractual documents for the construction and installation of Hawk signals by Ardent Company LLC for an amount not to exceed $332,200 plus a 10% contingency of $33,220 for a total amount not to exceed $365,420 as presented and subject to final city attorney review.
Moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Calvin. Okay, we are at city manager report.
Just a quick update on the Public Works building that we recently purchased. We are now officially landlord. We have 5 tenants. We closed on the building with essentially all of the financial transaction finalized, except for some back rent that we're still collecting and a stormwater management fee portion as part of the real estate tax. That's part of the HUD 1 statement. So we're essentially done closing. Going forward, we have some minor repairs that we're going to do to the pit station, but we got funding from the seller to do that and install water sub-meter because the previous landlord paid a water bill, but now we have tenants, so we got to pass that too. But we're on track to, we have processes in place to collect things like rent, taxes. I mentioned the water bill and common area and maintenance, so we're in a good place.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we do have a closed session. Dean, could you please read us into closed session?
I recommend the governing body go on a closed meeting for the following reasons. To discuss and consider the disposition of city-owned real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position and negotiating strategy of the city. to discuss two separate prospective businesses or industries where no previous announcements have been made of their interest in locating in the city, and to discuss the terms of a proposed amendment to the comprehensive development agreement with Norton Scott pursuant to paragraphs 3, 5, and 29 respectively of subsection 2.2-3711A of the Code of Virginia.
Okay? Moved.
Second.
Did we get a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries. Thank you. We'll go into closed section, 5-minute comfort break.